What if you have an employee who says they have a religious objection to getting the vaccination? Well, first, do you have any duty at all? If you have fewer than 8 employees and your workers don't work in the city of Seattle, you may have no obligation at all to even have this conversation. You may proceed with the conversation either because you think it's good business or it's good for morale or just good due process. And I think it's worth doing. Next step in the process, if you're asking for an accommodation, the employer is allowed to ask, so what is your religion? What is the central tenet of this religion, and how does it relate to this vaccination? There are religions, some Christian Scientists, some Jehovah's Witness, and others that oppose all healthcare treatment or doctors, or there could be a sincere objection to vaccination. And we should treat those people with dignity and respect. Sometimes asking them for specific details will filter out those rascally employees who are hoping, just because none of their friends think it's good, to get a vaccination, or the TV show they watch says vaccinations are big tech or big pharma. And if that's really the case, it's just they don't want to be pushed into having a vaccination. Again, let's treat them with dignity and respect, but you're not obligated to stop the process there. In fact, if they're asking for an accommodation, the next step is to get into what is the religion? Why is this a central tenet? How long have you had this religion? Are you having behaviors that are inconsistent with what you're telling me? So, for example, were you vaccinated for smallpox? Were you vaccinated for rubella? Other vaccinations in school? Again, let's be dignified and respectful in this conversation. Also, we're not going to make an employment decision because of their religion. We're going to do it because if the vaccination is a work requirement and it can't be resolved with a reasonable accommodation. And so then that step is gathering information. Once you have this, if the employee withholds the information, essentially they could be opting out of a reasonable accommodation right there. And so you might want to, you can, if you want to, give them the caution. You're asking for a workplace accommodation based on your religion and you won't give me information. This could be the end of the conversation. Are you sure? I'll have to make a decision without that information. And that you could act if they fail to engage with you. If they do engage with you and what you're hearing sounds like a sincere religious belief, a little tricky, it's a slippery rock to try to make a decision saying someone's not being sincere with you. You can. It may be more of a high-risk move than other grounds. Next step in the process is, can you make an accommodation? If you have a legitimate business reason for requiring vaccinations, and they could be many, you think they'll have lower risk of transmitting to a fellow employee, lower risk of transmitting to a customer, a vendor, lower employee absences, better health. There are legitimate business reasons to impose requirement for vaccinations. Not everybody's going to like that, but it's true, and Washington courts are going to recognize that. The next step in the process, if you have a legitimate business reason, is, can I accommodate it? Is there a reasonable accommodation? Now, the reasonable accommodation for religious belief is kind of a lower requirement on the employer than accommodating for a disability. So disability, we might spend more money, be more flexible. Accommodating religion, you're not legally required to do anything more than what would be an undue hardship. It's the same language that we use when accommodating disabilities, but the threshold the law requires is lower for accommodating religions. If it's anything more than de minimis, what do I mean? If you have to spend real money, if you have to cave on what you have as a legitimate business reason for requiring it, then it sounds like they are no longer qualified to do their job. If they're no longer qualified to do their job, you don't have to give them an accommodation. Now, if you want to talk it through with someone, you can talk it through with the employee. All of our employees are vaccinated, and you're telling me you can't be vaccinated. Is there any middle ground? Anything we can do to bridge this? That's good process, letting them have their say. But in the final analysis, they may not be qualified to do the job, and that could be the end of their job. Also, the Employment Security Department here in Washington has been interpreting this as the employee, it may be a voluntary quit, depending on some facts. If it's important, I can get into those in another lesson.